I did 10,000 hours of comprehensible input in French. I read hundreds of books. I listened to audiobooks, radio, TV, podcasts, everything. And now I can understand native speakers talking at full speed, no subtitles, no problem. And I can also read novels as fast as I read in my own language. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about this learning journey, how each stage went, what results I got, and more importantly, what you can learn from this. Let's start from the beginning. I started learning French in university. 4 years of classes, twice a week, in a room with over 20 other students, taught by a really old school teacher with really old school methods. Grammar tables, conjugation drills, fill in the blank exercises. You know exactly the kind of class I'm talking about because almost everyone has sat through one of these classes. I did 4 years of this. Not 4 months, 4 years. And at the end of those 4 years, my French was still basically non-existent. I was decent at passing exams because I had done hundreds of multiple choice exercises and I knew how to guess my way through a grammar test. But the moment it came to actual conversation, actually understanding a native speaker, talking at a normal speed, nothing. Zero. I couldn't follow it. And of course, I couldn't speak either. And here's the thing that made it worse. I ended up hating French because the classes were boring. They felt disconnected from anything real. And honestly, I only kept going because I needed the credits. And French became this subject I associated with boredom and failure. Even though, and this is important, I live right next to the French border. I had the language sitting right outside my door for my entire life. And 4 years of formal education still left me at 0. And this was, by the way, the experience of the rest of my classmates as well. I don't remember a single student from that class being able to speak French fluently after 4 years of classes. So the classes clearly failed. But later, at some point after university, something changed. Living so close to the border means that we pick up French TV stations here, alongside the Basque and Spanish ones. And I started watching them, almost by accident at first. But later on I found some French magazines, and they looked interesting, so I started flipping through them, and I realized something surprising. It wasn't nearly as hard to read as I expected, especially when the content was actually interesting. And around that same time, I came across the idea of comprehensible input. I was learning other languages and I was searching for a better way to learn languages because classes clearly weren't working. I already knew from experience that the classroom method wasn't working. It had failed me and everyone else, so I was looking for something else. And that's when I found the work built around Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input hypothesis. The idea that you acquire language primarily by being exposed to it and understanding it, not by memorizing grammar rules. And I went all in. I started watching French TV every single day. I put on French radio in the background. I read anything I could get my hands on. First magazines with lots of drawings, but eventually also books, real books, novels as well. Not just children's books, graded readers, all that stuff, but real books by native speakers, for native speakers. And at first it was hard, and I was looking up words constantly, but eventually things started clicking. And finishing your first book in a language, a real book, really feels like an accomplishment. It took a while, but I managed to do it. The second one was way easier. And the third book I read after that was even easier. And the next one after that was even easier. And I kept going, book after book, until I had read over 100 books in French. And between that and the listening, I had put in thousands of hours of comprehensible input in French. And the results in terms of comprehension were genuinely impressive. I could read French as fast and as easily as I read Spanish, Basque or English. I could listen to native speakers talk at full natural speed. I could understand it effortlessly. But if you had asked me at that point whether I was fluent in French, I would have said no. Because after thousands of hours of input, after reading over 100 books, by every measure, my comprehension was at least C1 level. But then, when I actually had to speak with native speakers, that's when the real problems started. Because I live right next to the French border, so I don't just consume French media, I run into French people regularly. And every single time, I found myself face to face with a native speaker of French, something strange happened. I understood every single word they said to me, but I couldn't produce a single sentence back. My mouth just didn't work. I knew the words, I understood the grammar, I had read literal novels worth of vocabulary in French, but when it came time to actually speak in real time to a real person standing in front of me, I froze. Nothing came out. Or what did come out was slow, broken, and nowhere near the level of comprehension that I had built. And this, by the way, did not fix itself after one or two awkward encounters. This kept happening over and over again, for years. Every trip across the border, every French tourist I met, every opportunity to actually use the language in real life, I always had the exact same problem. Full comprehension, almost impossible to speak. And eventually I came to a conclusion that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. Massive amounts of comprehensible input on its own does not teach you how to speak. It helps you understand, but those are two different skills, built through two different kinds of practice. And nobody selling you the input method tells you that part. So what did I do? Well, I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out what was actually missing. And here's what I found. Understanding a language is a receptive skill. Your brain is decoding something that's already there. Speaking is a production skill. Your brain has to generate something from nothing, in real time, under pressure, with almost no time to think. And the reality of it is that you can build one of those skills for thousands of hours, and it will do almost nothing for the other skill. That's not a motivation problem or a talent problem. It's simply a completely different mechanism. So I stopped waiting for speaking to just emerge on its own, just by getting enough input, and I started doing deliberate practice. I started using language islands. Here's what it looked like in practice. I sat down and wrote exactly what I wanted to be able to say in French. Real situations, real topics I want to talk about. The actual sentences I needed for my actual life, not some generic textbook dialogue. And once I had all those sentences that I needed, I started drilling them out loud, over and over again. And I started translating them from my language into French, and then checking if I said them correctly or not. And I kept doing this until I could produce them instantly, without translating in my head and without hesitating. Alongside that, I did a lot of shadowing, listening to native speaker audio and speaking along with it in real time, matching the rhythm, intonation, and the pace. I kept doing this until speaking French stopped feeling weird. And whenever I actually got the chance to talk to native speakers, of course I used it. Even though living next to the border doesn't mean you get unlimited free conversation practice, because real speaking opportunities are limited. Even if you live next to the country, even if you live in the country, you usually have to go out of your way to create those opportunities to talk to people. But if you've prepared for real conversations, you'll make sure that you use every single one of those chances much better, and you'll get a lot more speaking practice out of them. So drill your sentences, and when you find yourself in a real conversation, you'll be able to speak, and the conversation will keep going much longer. This way you'll get a lot more speaking practice, and your confidence will skyrocket. This combination of pre-built language blocks you can pull out instantly, active recall to burn them into memory, and constant speaking practice through shadowing and real conversations. This is what finally closed the gap. This made me fluent in French, and in many other languages as well. And this will make you fluent as well. Chances are you don't need more input. You need more output, trained deliberately. The same way you'd train any other skill if you actually wanted to get good at it. You need deliberate practice. And that is the real lesson here. What you really need is the exact opposite of what most language YouTubers are telling you. Comprehensible input is not useless. It will build your comprehension, and the more you do it, the better. But if your goal is to speak the language, input alone is not enough. If you only do comprehensible input, you're going to fail. The exact same way I failed with French for years. If you want to actually speak, you have to train your speaking skills directly. So write down your language islands and drill them. Lots of repetition, lots of shadowing, and active recall. Train your memory. And of course, get in front of real native speakers as often as you can and have real conversations. But for that to be less awkward, easier, and more enjoyable, make sure you learn your language islands first.